First off, I like to do an acknowledgement of country before I start. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and the community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. My first artifact object is an AFL ball. An AFL ball represents a sport which is close to my heart. Growing up, I've always played as many sports as I could. I've got an appreciation for a happy, healthy, and fit lifestyle. With this, I decided I wanted to become an HBE teacher. I want to pass this on to my students and give them the enjoyment I received from my HBE schooling. While growing up, I didn't have many First Nations teammates or friends. In fact, I had none at all. I was brought up in a higher socioeconomic environment, and I admit I recognize I have unconscious bias from lacking exposure and understanding to Indigenous culture and spirituality during my upbringing. As I furthered my AFL career and climbed up the experience ladder, I found that more and more First Nations peoples started to show up in my teams, become teammates and close friends. Through the friendships, I gained an awareness for First Nations people, their culture, their stories, and how they're treated or seen as. Having a close First Nations friend, this gave me a much stronger insight and understanding, respecting and establishing and maintaining relationships with First Nations peoples, their history and also their culture. My second object is an Australian AFL Indigenous round jersey. Australian sports like AFL, NRL and NBL host Indigenous rounds as a respect and acknowledgement for First Australians. Special jerseys designed by Indigenous artists with each team's uniform representing its connection to the land, their community, and they are made and worn by the players. During these Indigenous rounds, they begin with either a welcome to country or an acknowledgement of country. But if weekly, sometimes even daily, athletes are training, they're playing and hosting tens of thousands of people on this land, why isn't there a welcome to country or welcome to acknowledgement of country every time they play? Why is it that these Australian-born sports are only displaying true Australian culture once, twice, maximum 3 times through a whole season, when they're always playing in Australia and on Indigenous land? Examining the portrayal of Indigenous people in Australian sports, alongside the issues in current teaching training programs, developing a real understanding of Indigenous culture as shown through special sports events and jerseys is important not just in sports but also in education. Athletes take part in special Indigenous rounds to pay tribute to Australia's original inhabitants, and educators need to challenge deep-seated beliefs, especially related to whiteness, to improve academic achievements for Indigenous students. This highlights the importance of a widespread and consistent recognition of Indigenous land throughout different aspects of Australian life. Writers from the Australian Journal of Indigenous Education suggest that current professional learning programs might not effectively challenging teachers' beliefs and values. This could be a barrier to improving academic outcomes for Indigenous students. This authors stress the importance of increasing awareness about whiteness as a first step in challenging the ingrained beliefs of teachers who have been influenced by colonial ideas. Many teachers haven't received formal training in Aboriginal education, and as a result, a significant number of them lack a critical understanding of concepts like whiteness, colonialism, and Indigenous education. To improve the educational experience of Indigenous students, teachers need to reflect on and question their beliefs and values. My third aspect is an Australian athlete, Ali Anderson. I've worked with the First Nations athletes like Ali Anderson, an AFL player for the women's Brisbane Lions team. Working with Indigenous AFL athletes, I gained respect and understanding of culture and the importance of First Nations peoples playing the Australian game. Even though AFL was invented by the white man, First Nations people love the game as they get to represent their teams, their country, their land in a specific Australian game that we as Australians own. This has ignited my moral conscience to establish and maintain high expectations for First Nations peoples and to further motivate First Nations people to reach their potential. There are so many First Australian athletes that have to continue to represent their country, their people and their culture. First Nations man and NBA veteran Paddy Mills is one example of this. The NBA is the topmost basketball league in the world and quite unforgiving in the sense of having a long and successful career. Patty Mills is on his 13th year and has continued throughout to be an outstanding role player for his teams. He has also won a world championship doing so. The experiences and accomplishments of young Aboriginal Australian students in schools are deeply affected by the complex interplay of language, culture, and identity. Language is crucial through which cultural knowledge is passed on, forming a fundamental part of the identity for these students. It's essential to preserve and refresh Indigenous languages since they hold traditional wisdom, stories, and cultures. When these languages are sidelined or lost, a significant part of the student's cultural identity is lost as well. Additionally, teachers can often neglect Indigenous perspectives, making it difficult for students to connect with their heritage. The mismatch between the academic setting and the students' real experiences can make them feel alienated, impacting their overall involvement and success in schools. To address this, recognising and including Aboriginal culture practices and perspectives in the education system not only creates a sense of belonging, but also makes the curriculum more relevant. Adopting a holistic approach that acknowledges the interconnectedness of language, culture, and identity is important for establishing an inclusive educational environment. This approach empowers young Aboriginal Australian students to excel academically and instills a strong sense of pride in their heritage.